We begin this morning with an extensive interview with the state's most popular Democrat and junior senator, Richard Blumenthal. And Senator Blumenthal is with us today. Good to see you back here.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
I want to ask you, first of all, because it's been a little bit over a year, what's your favorite thing about being a senator?
You know, I still have to pinch myself when I walk onto the floor of the United States Senate and think about all the great people and the great moments in history that have occurred there. And really, the best part of this experience is learning, working with some very smart people, being at the center of policymaking and fighting for Connecticut, because I really think my most important task is to fight for Connecticut, advocate for the people of Connecticut, and that's my favorite part of the job.
What's the worst part of it?
Worst part of it is the partisan acrimony and the fighting. I've really tried to reach across the aisle and address the gridlock and paralysis that is all too evident and all too prevalent. People ask me what can be done about it, and I've really made an effort to work with Republicans on issues that may not be in the marquee, may not be the headline issues, but for example, addressing drug shortages, which are a real problem in Connecticut, Doxil and propofol, other kinds of workhorse medicines, or antibiotics to deal with the superbugs, the antibiotic-resistant germs, or veterans. Big priority for me is veterans. So the best part of the job is trying to address those problems, fighting for the people of Connecticut, and the least favorite part is addressing the partisanship.
The relationship between Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch is legendary. Is there a Republican that you're close with, whom you work with?
I've been working a lot with Mark Kirk when he was there. He's sick right now, as you know. Yep. Moderate Republican by standards these days. I've been working with Lamar Alexander and Bob Corker of Tennessee on the effort to develop more antibiotic resistant, the drugs that deal with antibiotics, and more incentives for development of those antibiotics. And we have a great bipartisan relationship. And working with others like, for example, John McCain and Lindsey Graham on some of the foreign policy issues where we've been countering the threat from a nuclear-armed Iran and working on resolutions together with Lindsey Graham. And I went on a trip, as a matter of fact, with Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and two other Republicans, Jeff Sessions and John Hoeven, to Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Israel, and Afghanistan. I've been to Afghanistan twice. And I would say another favorite part of my job, by the way, Dennis,
with travel,
is working with the military men and women who defend our country. We have some of the most extraordinary men and women in an all-volunteer military. They are truly, as General Petraeus has said, the next greatest generation. And I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee, as well as Judiciary, Health, Education, Labor, Pensions, and the Special Committee on Aging. And on the Armed Services Committee, I've had the privilege to work with many of our military and visit them twice in Afghanistan.
Because you brought up the veterans issue, I'm going to ask you, do you ever get asked when you're out in the field by some of the people out there about what happened 2 years ago?
No, I haven't been. I think veterans know that I'm fighting for them and working for them. I was a leader in helping to pass the Vow to Hire Veterans Act, which has established tax credits for expanded tax credits for hiring veterans, and I authored an amendment to expand the Transition Assistance Program and other programs that are designed to provide for military men and women as they transition into civilian life. And, you know, we're going to be having tens of thousands come back from Iraq and Afghanistan, already from Iraq, and we need to keep faith with them. We need to make sure we leave no veteran behind. And I have other measures that are now part of the new Defense Authorization Act, which is hopefully about to be passed by Congress in the next couple of months.
Why didn't Democrats support President Obama's budget a few weeks ago?
That budget really dated from a time before now, and there need to be a series of balanced cuts as well as revenue increases. We have a Budget Control Act that takes us through the end of this year, in fact, makes major cuts to spending.
Revenue increases is a tax increase. What would you like to see? What kind of taxes do you want to see increased?
I'd like to see, for example, just as an example, closing loopholes and increasing taxes on companies that send jobs overseas. We still haven't closed that loophole. I'd like to see an end to the tax breaks and other subsidies that big oil and gas interests get. And that, again, has continued despite our advocacy and even a vote in the Senate, which unfortunately didn't get the 60 that it needs, the threshold for a majority. I'd like to see the tax loophole that enables wealthy professionals to establish, in effect, sham corporations and thereby dodge payroll taxes for Medicare and Social Security. Again, there's a measure on the floor of the Senate right now which would reduce or continue the reduced rate on student loans at 3.4% and prevent them from rising to 6.8%, as they will do unless we pass that measure. And it would also close that loophole.
Wouldn't it cancel each other out, though, if you're going to tax, companies that send jobs overseas, and yet you have a tax break for someone who buys a Toyota Prius, which is made in a Japanese factory? Doesn't it sort of cancel each other out?
Not at all, because we keep jobs here. And that's one of the major purposes.
But by people buying a foreign product, doesn't that support
one of my priorities has been to provide more jobs here in Connecticut and around the country. When a company is rewarded, in effect, for shipping jobs overseas, when it can take the expenses now, keep the profits overseas, and now, by the way, here's another loophole that ought to be closed, bring back those profits, or in an effort to bring back those profits, want to expand a loophole that exists right now, I think that we do a disservice to our workers here, and I would like to see, if there is any repatriation, have it tied to jobs.
Would you like to see an increase in taxes among the wealthy? Should the wealthy pay more in taxes?
Well, I think there ought to be a minimum, 30% for people who make more than $1 million a year, the Buffett rule. I strongly favor the Buffett rule, and I believe that it makes sense not only as a matter of fairness, but also good economic policy. One of the very troubling trends in our country right now is the expanding and widening disparities in income and wealth. And I think people who earn more than $1 million a year should pay 30%, which, as you know, is way below what it was just 50 or 60 years ago, when people earning that amount of money would pay much higher rates. So a minimum of 30%, which would be a tax increase for the wealthiest, that is, people earning more than $1 million a year.
I want to ask you about an issue that's come up this week, gender-selective abortions. Do you support that?
Well, I support efforts to restrict reproductive rights. There is a measure in the House to forbid certain kinds of abortions, which I think is excessively vague. It is so vague that it would, in effect, permit abuse, intimidation of women lawfully seeking to exercise their right to privacy and abortion rights, which are guaranteed under the Constitution. And, there's a very important principle here, Dennis, which goes way beyond this measure in the House and way beyond the question that you asked, and that is the assault by the far right in this country on women's health care. One of the most satisfying aspects of my service in the United States Senate has been the fight against that assault on women's health care. And it goes to the Violence Against Women Act, which the far right has blocked. I have helped to lead that effort and the passage in the Senate by an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote of the Violence Against Women Act. I've helped to lead the effort to combat the assault on Planned Parenthood and women's health care in clinics that involve screening for cancer and other diseases. So I think this principle is very, very important.
But there are a lot of women who are offended when Democrats try to compare, they say women's health care, comparing perhaps equalizing a pap smear to an abortion. And there is a big difference. And in one particular case that some Republicans are arguing, if a pregnant woman with 2 daughters has an ultrasound, finds out she's having a girl, is it okay for that person to get an abortion?
Decisions
based on gender.
Decisions about reproductive rights are private. They should be private.
So you support that? You would support her?
The assault on, for example, Planned Parenthood has been about clinics that overwhelmingly, more than 90%, maybe as much as 98% of the work they do is for screening for disease, like cancer.
Do you think it's unethical to get an abortion based on gender?
So I believe that abortions should be safe, legal, and rare. And I am not going to tell a woman what to do, how to exercise her rights, and I believe that the state, meaning the United States government and states, are forbidden by the United States Constitution, and I would oppose measures like the one now on the floor of the House that would restrict a woman's right to choose.
Do you think it's wrong to have an abortion based on gender, which hurts female babies, they say, because those are the ones aborted more than male fetuses?
My views, Dennis, and I may disapprove of that kind of measure, should not be imposed through a law that is broad, vague, overreaching, unconstitutional, intrusive on the rights of women.
Let's talk about the ban in New York City on sugary drinks, large sugary drinks. How do you feel about that?
I'm very much in favor of disclosure. I think there ought to be labeling so that people know the amount of sugar, how many calories there are, and that happens now on most of those drinks. I think that a ban probably goes too far.
So people should be able to buy what they want.
People should have the freedom to buy what they wish, unless there are good, solid public health reasons to ban them. Tobacco, which is far more pernicious in its health effects, is a legal product. And it is also addictive. And I've continued to fight against tobacco addiction, arguing for more prevention and cessation. And by the way, tobacco products do not have ingredients listed. So I am strongly in favor of full disclosure and labeling, which is not the case for some of those drinks if they are sold in certain kinds of restaurants.
Speaking of sugary drinks, you were out supporting the Teamsters last week in East Hartford at the Coca-Cola plant. What kind of conversations have you had with the company about this to try to reach an agreement?
I am in indirect contact with the company, but I haven't been involved in the talks. I've heard from people who have been in contact with the company, but I haven't been involved in the talks at all.
Why support the protesters then?
Because I really feel strongly that cutting health care or increasing the cost of health care for those workers is contrary to their interests and all of our interests in the state of Connecticut.
But the company says that's not what they're doing.
Well, the workers tell me differently, and my review is that there are effects on their health care and the costs of health care to them individually. In effect, the cost to them of their health care are being raised.
The union is calling for a boycott of Coca-Cola. Do you support that?
You know, I am not boycotting Coca-Cola. If union workers want to do so, that's their right.
You've complained that not enough is done to fix the roads in our country. And as you know, the state has passed the controversial busway program. How do you feel about that? Would you have rather have seen that federal money spent on improving roads?
I will fight for federal money to Connecticut to support the state's decision. And the state's made a decision here.
Do you think the busway is a good plan?
I believe that local decisions about transportation ought to be fought for by representatives in Washington. And that decision was made without my vote or my involvement. And I'm going to support it as best I can through federal funding. And my hope is that both surface and rail, that is, both bus and rail, will come to Connecticut in greater measure, because that surface transportation bill, again, has been blocked by people on the far right, representatives in Washington, who want government to do nothing. It was passed, again, overwhelmingly by the United States Senate, bipartisan vote, and I believe strongly that the House should act. It's a jobs bill. And again, let's look at priorities here. I know you're asking a lot of good questions about other topics, but jobs, economic growth are my priority. They are the priority of the people of Connecticut, and I will support any project, including, for example, the Science Center project, where I visited this morning, the Bell Brothers manufacturing plant, combination of high-tech and low-tech, where I also visited today, to make sure we have more jobs in Connecticut. And if people tell me the busway will give Connecticut more jobs, I'll support it.
You've long been an anti-corruption crusader. Do you support former State Senator Ernest Newton in his bid to come back to office?
Well, you know, I supported, advocated, and was the originator of the measure that will stop corrupt public officials from receiving pensions. I advocated that it be applied retroactively. It will be applied prospectively to officials in the future. So you're right. I have been a long advocate. I investigated some kinds of public corruption. I believe that decision about Ernie Newton's qualifications, he has a legal right to run, but his qualifications are for the people of Bridgeport.
Do you think it sends a message to the state if he wins?
Why don't we wait and see what the voters decide?
Would you like to endorse his opponent?
I haven't endorsed his opponent. I haven't any intention of endorsing at this point.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.